I think the government stinks. And I think the last government stank. And what's more, I think the government even before that stank. Whether I believe that or not is quite irrelevant. What is important is whether I can say it without being locked up by the King's men. It wasn't always so. The rights enjoyed in a free democracy started right here. It was here, near to the High Street, that blood was shed in the name of freedom. It was match of the day, the King versus the barons. King Henry III was roundly defeated at the Battle of Lewes, just on the edge of the town. Despite holding the castle, the King's men were put to the sword, and many were massacred in both the huge priory, which stood near the town, and right here in our bloody High Street. Panicking soldiers were easy pickings for the pursuing forces of Simon de Montfort. The Battle of Lewes is said to be the first step towards democracy in this country. That was in 1243. If you say the Battle of Lewes to most people around this country now, they glance at you with vacant eyes. They don't know what it's about. What was it about?
Well, you're right. Most people here don't know about it. What happened was Simon de Montfort and his barons were arguing with the king and his men about representation in Parliament, whereas the king, the king just had all of his men and a lot of his French relatives in Parliament, and he was taxing the barons very heavily, and all of this money was going to the French relatives or going abroad, and the barons were not very happy about this. So they wanted at least half of the 24 men in Parliament to be elected barons. So, I mean, though it's not very democratic in the sense that we have it today, it's the start of that representation of that is not just the king's view on how things should be run. Simon de Montfort got to hear that the king was down at the Priory of St. Pancras. And why he was there was for the Feast of St. Pancras in the middle of May. And of course it was a big feast and people would come from all over the world, actually, all over Europe to the feast. So he needed somewhere as big as the Priory to be able to feed all these people and entertain them for a few days. And that's why he was here. Simon de Montfort was up country in northern Sussex in some of his estates with his men, and he heard that the king was down here and he sent messengers. He sent bishops of Winchester and London down with money, with £30,000, which is a fortune in those days, to try and negotiate a settlement with the king. The king was a little bit reticent to go into war with Simon de Montfort because, yes, they were brother-in-laws and he was an old man. They were in their late 50s at the time. Not that that's old now, but it was then. But the king's brother, Richard of Alamein, also called King of the Romans, etc., he wanted war. And, of course, Prince Edward, hothead, he definitely wanted war. So they settled, you know, the ransom money was sent back and the envoys, the bishops were sent back, and so it was war the next day. They negotiated the Mise of Lewes, most of which was, you know, yes, we took this castle, well, we give you it back and you give us this and we'll ransom this man and that man for this man and that kind of thing. But it also set down where the king would say, you know, 24 of the 24, we're going to have 12 elected barons, so that we're going to have the beginning of a parliamentary election. And Simon de Montfort made the king hand over his seals, which meant that the king had no power. So Simon de Montfort became the de facto king. It changed the king's complete and outright power. And Prince Edward then went on to, as king, ratify the clauses of the Magna Carta and the provisions of Oxford. And those began to change the king's power. And it also meant things like, if a woman died as a widow, her dowry money was hers. It didn't need to be given over to her husband's family and sons and what have you.
There's a start of women's rights as well.
There you go.
My goodness me.
There you go. The Normans did it for us.